Well, hello there. If you want to learn how we made a dog stick library, keep on watching. We'll get started. Come on. Oh, you just want to chew it? Oh. Oh.
Over the past 3 years, I've taken on projects at the very beginning of the year, which are completely for free for my local community, mainly driveway cleaning and sealing for people that are unable to do it themselves. However, this year I want to take on a project that everyone in my local community could see and appreciate, which is why we're going to be doing a dog stick library.
Through copious amounts of research, white oak is definitely better than your standard red oak as far as an exterior application. Now, we're going to be doing a little bit of planing down these boards in order to make sure that these boards are glued appropriately together without coming apart for long periods of time. So let's get these boards cut down to size and we can then start the gluing process.
I live extremely close to the beach here in the Pacific Northwest, and I take my dog Kona down to that beach almost every single week, even during the winter. There's not much he loves more than a good stick, and I figured why not give back to those individuals who love dogs or just the dogs themselves by building a dog stick library. I've seen a few different posts about these, but I've never seen a tutorial on how to make a dog stick library, so I figured I'd do one, especially since I haven't seen one of these units built in my local community yet, of course. The first step with this material is to prep this material as needed and break it down accordingly. The white oak needs to be cut down to approximately 30-inch long slabs, and then I bring it over to the table saw. Now, that first cut that I was making at the very beginning of this video was to even out one side of the board with my homemade track saw. That way I can run that side of the board right up against my fence of the table saw and have a perfect dimensional piece of lumber that I can start gluing together. Of course, before we get to gluing, I do have to cut the remaining boards along with cutting the very top edge of the top board. Now, this board is a bit smaller than the previous boards that I ran through the table saw, but I am going to be cutting a 45-degree angle on the very top of this board. That's because I want water and any moisture that hits this board at the very top to drain off and make it somewhat less likely for moisture to penetrate the top section of this board, which is where standing water would be located. Now that we're ready for gluing, I'm using Titebond 3, which is important because this product is used for exterior and interior use. Titebond 2 is only for interior, so make sure you're using a glue that is suitable for exterior applications. I make sure that every side has an adequate and consistent amount of glue because I'd always rather have too much glue and have the runoff just fall off onto my table than have too little glue and it compromises the bond strength between the two pieces of wood. Once all of our boards are fully glued up, it's time for clamping. And for our clamps, I'm using these pipe clamps. Now, these are my favorite clamps because they're not only extremely strong, but they're very relatable to the exact size that you need. So if I needed this to be a little bit longer, I could simply attach another piece of 3/4 inch pipe to accommodate the size. As I finish up our clamping and wait for our glue to dry, we can move on to our sign. Now, the sign is going to be made up of the same exact material, but we're going to do something a little bit special with it. Meet the laser cutter. Now, this can be used for a multitude of applications and extremely easy to use, but quite expensive. Luckily for me, I knew someone in the area that had one that I could accommodate and use very quickly and easily. This literally took 30 minutes to do, so it was quite satisfying. Just make sure that everything is spelled correctly the first time. I may have double checked the lettering before I brought it to the laser cutter, mainly because I'm dyslexic, so I tend to misspell things. Everything was correct, but always good to double check just in case.
I am certainly pleased with how this sign turned out. That laser level just does a magical job at making such crisp letters so easily. Well, a couple things though, we do a little bit of adjustment on the overall aesthetic of this sign so we have water draining down off the sign as easily as possible. Then we'll glue it on.
That same 45-degree angle is placed at the very top of this board just to make sure that water is draining properly, but I'm also cutting a small relief at the very base of the sign, and that's going to be acting as a drip edge for the sign itself. At this time our glue was dry, so I removed all of the clamps and immediately realized that we need to cut this slab down to size before we install our sign. Before I make any cuts at this point, I do clamp down an aluminum rail as a guide for my circular saw, not only to cut straight, but to cut off as minimal amount of lumber as possible so this sign is as big as possible. With both sides cut off, I can move on to our lettering. Now the lettering can be a little bit longer if needed, because that can always be sanded down, but I make sure it's not going to be shorter than the board that we'll be gluing it to right below it. Just to reiterate, this is Titebond 3 for exterior glue applications, and once both sides are fully glued up, I clamp them into position. Now I do want to be very accurate where I'm gluing this sign because I want to make sure that that 45-degree angle on the top of this sign lines up perfectly with the 45-degree angle on the large board below it. I let the board dry overnight, come back to it the next day, remove the clamps, and it's time to start sanding. I'm taking my Bosch random orbital sander and using 100 grit over this entire surface. Now, the really nice thing about this sander specifically is because it has a turbo mode, which basically just means once you hit that turbo mode, it's much more aggressive and it's not using a random orbital pattern. This just allows you to take off more material in a quicker fashion, which is really nice in areas where you're going to need it, but I always finish on the random orbital mode to make sure that we don't have any swirl marks in the end. Every inch of this sign, including the back side of the sign, is sanded down completely with 100 grit sandpaper. Once that's done, it's time to wipe off some excess with some mineral spirits, which I do along with a tack cloth. This process is removing the vast majority of any leftover sawdust on our sign before we get to finish. The product we'll be applying first is this Rubio Monocoat Oil Plus 2C finish, which is a very high quality two-part finish that comes with a hardener, which does allow this finish to dry extremely quickly compared to others. It is a 3-to-1 ratio, so I'm using 3 parts finish to 1 part hardener. I could have dumped this entire can out into this container, but I figured I'd try and save as much as I could, and these mixing cups really do make it very easy to make sure you have a 3-to-1 ratio or any other ratio as needed. The finish is poured directly onto the board, and then I use a plastic scraper to squeegee it into position so all the fibers of your board get fully saturated as you maneuver the finish from one corner to the next. This technique does get a little bit cumbersome and messy if you're trying to do a vertical side, but for flat terrain areas, it works out extremely well and quite satisfying in my personal opinion. And just like always, I will be leaving links to all the materials and tools that you see in this video, so if you do want any of them, I will make sure they are readily available in the description of this video below. Once I have my board fully saturated, I then grab a Rubio applicator pad and go over the surface evenly, basically to provide a nice once over with this finish to ensure that we have even coverage over the entire area. I let the finish sit for approximately 5 to 10 minutes and then I come back to it and wipe it off with some clean lint-free cloths. Now you do want to come back to this finish in a timely manner, especially if you added the accelerator, because this material will start getting tacky and sticky on you, and the longer it sits, the harder it's going to be to remove. I finished off the backside shortly thereafter, and once that was taken care of and wiped off, I let it dry overnight and came back to it the next day to apply a second finish.
I absolutely love woodworking, however, I'm not too involved with these days because the construction side of BYOT is so prevalent and, in all honesty and personally, more important in my perspective. This product, however, is one of the items that I truly wanted to use for close to a year now. This is N3 Nano, and it's a waterproof coating that we can place right over the top of our woodworking surface. Now, if you've seen this product before in the past, you probably know Cam from Blacktail Studios, and he's a buddy of mine in the Pacific Northwest. He's not paying me to do this whatsoever. I'm just basically providing a real honest test, an ultimate test for exterior use. I did call him up and say, hey, can this product be used exteriorly? And he said, yeah, give it your best shot. And so we are going to be placing this close to the ocean in the Pacific Northwest, so we are going to have an ultimate test to see how truly waterproof this finish is and how long it actually lasts.
There's a multitude of items that come with the kit, number one specifically being this prep surface spray. This inherently preps the surface for your finish coat, which I technically shouldn't have had to do, but because I was handling it without gloves and I was leaning on it just a moment ago, I quickly realized, oh yeah, I should use this just in case any of that grease and grime that is coming off of your skin is on your board, which potentially would damage the bonding strength between the two finishes. The first coat we'll be applying with the N3 Nano is this hard coat. Now I dab it onto our applicator pad, and once that's fully saturated, I do a nice lap line across one side and use that as a guide to filter off that finish across half of the board. Now I am trying to follow the instructions as best as possible, so what it seems like you want to do is to make sure you're working it in small sections. I could have probably finished off this whole board in one foul swoop, but I don't want any swirl marks, and in order to avoid that, you do want to work in smaller sections. The main reason for this is that this material dries extremely quickly. Basically, once this product is applied, you should be removing any excess within a mere minute or two, or within literally 30 seconds if it is a warm day. It's not a warm day in this application because we're in the midst of winter, so I had a little bit of extra time to work with, but you do want to make sure you're wiping off this excess fairly quickly, otherwise there's a potential for streaks. Also know there's an extremely detailed tutorial dedicated to this product that Cam does himself, and I'll make sure there's a link for that video in the description of this video. I let the hard coat dry approximately 24 hours and come back to the board to apply our top coat. This top coat is applied the same exact way by applying it to our applicator pad, applying a nice lap line, and then proceeding to application after that. Again, same as before, this product does dry extremely fast, so you do want to remove any excess fairly quickly. Now, if this product was a dining room table, I certainly wouldn't apply this product to the underside of that table. However, because this is an exterior project, I do have to apply it to the backside as well, so I'm just not going to show you that, just know that the same exact process is done on the backside as well. Just to reiterate, we are applying 2 coats of this top coat to our board, then wiping it off smooth, letting it dry, and proceeding to getting to our hardware. Now, in all honesty, I did get a real life example of how well this finish worked, or at least how smooth it is, because I normally apply some painter's tape to my boards to mark my lines. However, painter tape just apparently doesn't stick to N3 Nano. Yeah, pretty crazy. I've never had this experience before on a finish, but it was that smooth. Hopefully that bodes well for its waterproofing protection, but till then, let's get to our hardware. I center and mark our lines depending on where I want our hardware to be, and pre-drill our holes accordingly for our stainless steel screws. I'm also applying a washer. This is a soft gasket washer, which means that it's going to prevent any moisture to get behind that screw and potentially corrode and damage the wood behind it, which would inevitably make this board obsolete as a dog stick library. I centered and laid out all of our hangers, making sure that they were all equally spaced across the entire board. As for the hangers themselves, if you're saying this just doesn't fit the aesthetic of the board, I get it, and in all honesty, I do agree with you, but this was a product that I found at my local hardware store that I knew was going to be a high quality, heavy duty product. These are steel garage hooks that are powder coated with a rubberized coating on the tail end as well. This should hold up quite well with the barrage of elements that it's going to be introduced to, but if they don't, I'll make sure and let everyone know in the near future. When it comes to the post that's supporting this sign, I'm going with a 4x4 pressure treated piece of lumber that I cut down to size and cut a 45-degree angle on the top section. Now this top section does have a 45-degree angle because I want to make sure that any water that's penetrating it is going to be hitting it and sloping downward, less likely to rot over time. I mark a center line at each individual board that I glued up together to make sure that I had a proper piloted hole for a large fastener to drill into our post on the back side. Each one of these large exterior screws also has a rubberized washer on the back side to make sure that any moisture that hits this board doesn't go behind our fasteners, rotting the wood even quicker. With our sign and post ready to go, it's now time for the base that's going to be holding this up, and that's where a few bags of concrete along with a 5-gallon bucket is involved. I did decide to go with some fast setting concrete in lieu of a normal bag of concrete because I was in a bit of a rush to try and make a beautiful sunset for this evening. And just know that this does say it'll set up in 30 minutes, but that does not mean it's fully hardened and cured within 30 minutes. It'll still take plenty of time to get to full strength capacity, but it will stiffen up within a shorter amount of time compared to other normal bags of concrete. Now, if anyone else is trying to make this type of footing, just make it easier on yourself and mix up the concrete in a wheelbarrow if you have it versus in a 5-gallon bucket. It was definitely more cumbersome this way, so just do a wheelbarrow and then move it into your 5-gallon bucket. With our sign and concrete footer in hand, I make my way down to my local beach, dig a nice sizable hole for our bucket to lay it in, and once that hole is dug, we could start rolling our sizable concrete footer into position. Now, this isn't as deep as how I would normally want a footer, but in this sort of application, I feel it's fine, and this thing weighs easily over 100 pounds, so it should hold up quite well when you're considering it's only supporting a sign and not a deck. I make sure our galvanized post bracket is level prior to moving any of the soil back into the hole, and once it's level, I then fill the hole, stomp it down flat, and we're ready for a sign.
Okay, we gotta hurry. Sunset's about to happen.
We were a bit under the gun on this one, but timing was near perfect because by the time I got this thing drilled in with some long galvanized screws, it was a picture perfect moment with a number of people already asking me about the sign.
Okay, we're in. We're already getting compliments. It's a good sign. Let's take a look. Oh yeah, that is perfect. Right in time for the sunset. Okay, for the first stick, it's got to be a big one. This is a perfect one for Kona, so there's the first stick. Now we can just add from there.
I truly do love giving back to my community whenever possible, especially in something that's this fun. I get to go down to the beach with my dog and kids every single week, and now hopefully it'll be a lot easier to find sticks at this beach for dogs and potentially even small children. Yeah, for some reason my son does like the taste of sticks every now and then, so we have to pry it away from him whenever that happens. But no matter who's enjoying a perfectly good beach stick, this is truly one beautiful, sexy beast of a dog stick library. Oh yeah. Oh, and side note, if you do come across this sign, please make sure you actually tag BYOT. I'd love to know who's finding this sign in their outdoor adventures.